Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm bringing you my September wrap-up. I read 9 books in the month of September and I thoroughly enjoyed most of them, so without further ado, I'm going to show you what they are. The first book that I read was The Diabolic by S.J. Kincaid. The Diabolic follows Nemesis, a Diabolic, which is essentially a creature that's part human with some animal genes spliced into their DNA that's basically created to defend and protect one single person that they've bonded to in early youth. After the Emperor of basically an entire galaxy outlaws Diabolics, Nemesis is one of the only ones left alive. And to protect herself and the girl that she's bonded to, Sidonia, she has to go to the Emperor's court and pretend to be Sidonia herself. While she's at the Emperor's court, Nemesis figures out that the running of the universe is not quite as simple as it seems, that the Empire is sort of crumbling, and she also personally discovers that Diabolics are not, soulless shells, and that she actually does have the capacity to love people besides Sidonia. And everything gets thoroughly complicated when the starship that Sidonia lives on is destroyed by the Emperor. So as far as things I like about the Diabolic, this was a reread for me, so I already kind of knew what to expect. I really love how S.J. Kincaid wrote this. Nemesis as a character is not quite human, so the way that her thought process moves is very logic-driven and analytical, while at the same time being kind of savage, and I got that feeling a lot through the prose. Additionally, I think that the world building of the Empire is stellar. Just their customs and their religion and everything just meshes so well with Nemesis's story that it feels really natural and not forced in there for like a splash of color. As far as things I didn't, because of the same style of writing and because Nemesis is so, and then this happened, the pacing sometimes felt a little weird. I couldn't really get a grip on how much time had elapsed between certain things, and that is what unfortunately brought my rating down to a 4.25/4.5 out of 5 stars. Immediately following The Diabolic, I read The Empress, the sequel to The Diabolic by S.J. Kincaid. To avoid spoilers, I won't really go into detail about what this one is about. Essentially, Nemesis, the person she develops feelings for in The Diabolic, and a person that she becomes friends with in The Diabolic realize that what's left of the Empire is going to crap and they have to figure out how to solve it, but they're not very good at it, and things go horribly wrong. So as far as things I liked, I did still enjoy Nemesis. I liked seeing how she acted when thrown into a new scenario, when she sort of come to terms with accepting her own humanity. I thought that her unsurety of things was pretty accurate to somebody who'd just been thrown into what's essentially a whole new world for her. As far as things I didn't like, unfortunately, most of the rest. So the world building from book 1, there were like a couple threads that just seemed to have been picked up, and then S.J. Kincaid was like, oh, but wait, there's more. I think The Diabolic could have stood alone as a novel. I think the ending was very succinct, and the Empress seemed to kind of have to prove that, oh, but it's not the end because this ridiculous thing that happened, but none of the things that happened made sense given the first book. The Empress sort of felt like if somebody wrote fanfiction of the first book, and I wasn't having it. Additionally, I won't spoil things, but Nemesis's love interest's character development is completely retconned, and I hate it. I hate it. I loved the way that their relationship developed in book 1, and that's just kind of gone to crap. Nevertheless, it was a fun story, and I ended up giving The Empress a 2.75 to a 3 out of 5 stars. I'm very iffy on these books. It literally depends day to day whether I like them more or dislike them more. And almost immediately after that, I was thrust into the world of reading for school. The first book that I finished reading for school was Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. As you probably know, because it's just such a part of our pop culture, Brokeback Mountain follows 2 young, well, essentially boys, they're like under 20 when the story starts, named Jack and Ennis, who take a job herding sheep on a mountain. And while they're up on that mountain, they discover their passion and their love for one another. But unfortunately, they live in a highly homophobic, super stigmatized community, and their love story turns into a bit of a tragedy. Things I liked, oh my god, Annie Proulx's writing style. She's so direct. Brokeback Mountain was originally a short story published in The New Yorker, and as such, the pacing has to be a little bit quicker. It's told in a sort of flashback way where you first see Ennis's life after, and then you see all the events that led up to it, and then you see like the same vignette from the start at the end again. And it sort of brings the whole story full circle, and it just felt so inevitable. All of the joy and all of the sorrow and all of the goddamn tragedy of Jack and Ennis felt like it had to happen because the circumstances were what they were, And Annie Proulx doesn't shy away from writing it, but she also doesn't make it like overly verbose and like tragic. She just lets you feel the tragedy through the simplicity of her words, so you know the sorrow you feel is because of your own empathy. It's not because she's manufactured it. And I'm really blanking on a thing I didn't like. Was I a fan of the way that women were discussed in this story? No. Ennis's wife is essentially compared to livestock, and he doesn't mean it in an awful way, but there's something about that does leave a bad taste in my mouth. I really enjoyed Brokeback Mountain overall, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. After this, I read Maggie, A Girl of the Streets by Stephen Crane. The story follows the eponymous Maggie and her older brother in the slums of New York City in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Raised in the horrors of tenement housing, Maggie remains optimistic and a romantic at heart. So when she meets Pete, a man that she thinks will sort of bring her out of this life and into a slightly better one, she latches onto him, and this unfortunately causes her alcoholic mother to kick her out of the house. Things just go downhill for Maggie from then. Things I liked, I liked Maggie. She was sweet. She's meant to be a very sympathetic character. I felt she was a little childish in her reactions at times, but she was also a victim of abuse, so I completely understand why sometimes she would regress to a previous state of being where perhaps she felt a little more safe. Additionally, as preachy as it was, and I'll get to that in a second, I do like Stephen Crane's commentary because it was pretty radical at the time. Rather than talking down about women who sort of have to turn to prostitution or want to turn to prostitution as a means of making a living and keeping themselves alive, he was kind of saying like, they're just people, but not really, and that's the things I didn't like. I feel like Stephen Crane, and he was a very wealthy, straight white man writing about an underprivileged girl in an underprivileged community. He sort of robbed Maggie of any real agency. She was a very reactionary character instead of an active one, and I get the feeling that if she had chosen the path that she had gone down, that Stephen Crane and his audience would have been a lot less sympathetic towards her. I don't know, I dislike people co-opting the realities and sometimes tragedies of others to like make their own points about things. I just don't like it. I ended up giving Maggie a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And then, like a balm to my soul, I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. The story primarily follows Evelyn Hugo, a Hollywood starlet from the golden age of Hollywood, as she claws her way into this position of relative power and then keeps herself there and has to navigate this very difficult world that no one prepared her for and that doesn't really care whether she survives or not. And that sounds very awful, but it's not. In a dual timeline, it sort of follows Monique, a girl from present day who is writing Evelyn Hugo's biography now that she is 80 years old. Oh my god, okay. What do I even say at this point? Things I liked, all of it. If you want to know what I loved in more detail, please wait a week, maybe 2 weeks, and I will have a review of this brilliant, beautiful book up on my channel. Just know that the short answer is all of it. Things I didn't like. The ending felt a little bit like the big twist at the end felt like a little bit like really like I think it took away from the impact of the story and the relationship between Monique and Evelyn more than it added to it. I ended up giving The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Following that, I read House of Skin, a series of short stories by Kiana Davenport. Like I said, House of Skin is a collection of short stories, but there are a few central themes that connect them. Most, if not all of them, have to do with Pacific Islander women coming to terms with their identity, both on the island and away from it, both as citizens and expatriates, and figuring out what lines they straddle between their communities. The stories tackle issues like sexism, racism, xenophobia, drug addiction, abuse, cultural power dynamics, and just so many more things. They are an absolutely stunning collection. As far as things I liked, I really liked Davenport's writing style. It changes a little bit from story to story, and it was really good to get some variety. I sometimes struggle with short stories if they all sound the same, because then it's like, well, why didn't you just turn this into a whole novel? But each of these was a self-contained thing, stood on its own, and was very, very powerful on its own. I did like some more than I liked others, but they all had a very unique voice. As far as things I didn't like, it did sometimes feel like Davenport was getting a bit preachy with some of the stories. She is of mixed heritage. Her mother is Polynesian, or her father is a white man from Alabama whose grandfather was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and I completely understand why she'd want to distance herself from that part of her heritage, but the way that she sort of writes about it, it's as if she wants to erase that it's even a part of her, which I don't think is honest or really justifiable. I don't know. It sort of feels like she wants to co-opt a culture and pretend it's all of her and completely ignore a whole other side of her. It's a strange dichotomy. I don't know, maybe that's just my reading of it. As somebody who feels culturally divided, I do kind of understand where she's coming from. It did feel like she was beating us as readers over the head with it a bit for certain stories. As it is, I really enjoyed the stories, and I ended up giving House of Skin a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I really needed something light and fun because I hadn't read something light and fun since the very, very start of the month. So I read Reflection, A Twisted Tale by Elizabeth Lim. This is part of Disney's What If Something About One of Our Iconic Movies Was Wildly Different series, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Reflection is like an alternate universe version of Disney's Mulan. It opens on the mountain scene where they're fighting the Huns, but with the twist that rather than Mulan being the one injured, it's actually Li Shang who is injured. And partly because of guilt, because it was her own inaction that sort of led to his injury and therefore his future death, and partly because of guilt for not being completely honest with him, Mulan decides that she will do anything in the world to save him, including traversing into the world of the dead to bring his spirit back. The things I liked, this felt so much like the Disney movie, and I'm a Disney fan. I know that there's like a lot of problems with it. I don't care. I'm trash for Disney. So I know my Disney. I recognize what feels like Disney and what doesn't, and this very much felt like Disney. I could picture where all the musical numbers would go. All of the scenes described, I could picture them in the exact animation of the film. All of the characterization was pretty spot on and just great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that the mythology aspects of it were really fascinating to read about, and I'm now like way more interested in looking up some stuff about Chinese mythology because I want to know, is this real? Is DU the actual underworld? Like, is King Yama gonna be there to weigh our souls? Who even knows? I want to find out now. As far as things I didn't like, sometimes it felt a little bit too much like a movie, and movies, as you guys know, tend to be a little more fast-paced than books. So some things felt a little quick. The relationship between Mulan and Li Shang I felt was a little more developed in the film. Maybe, I don't know, if you novelized the film as it is, it would probably be just as quick as it was in this book. So I'm torn. There's just some things that felt a little fast. I ended up giving Reflection a 4 out of 5 stars. After I finished Reflection, the next thing that I finished was The Valley of Horses by Jean M. Ahl. The Valley of Horses is the sequel to Clan of the Cave Bear, a book which I buddy read with my friend Celise from the Book Armada 2 months ago at this point, I think. Wow. I buddy read this one with Celise as well, and doing that was the best possible way to read this book. She's such an insightful, wonderful reader, and if you like that sort of thing on your booktube content, I super recommend checking her out. I'll leave her channel link to the description box below. So as I said, Valley of Horses is the sequel to Clan of the Cave Bear. It still follows Ayla, the same Cro-Magnon girl who was living with a band of Neanderthals from age 5 to about age 14. But after the events at the end of Clan of the Cave Bear, Ayla finds herself alone and needing to learn how to survive. Ayla sort of discovers what her capabilities are and what sort of things that she can do, and she finally, without the restrictions imposed by the clan, is free to discover what it means to be human and how her brain works and why it works the way it does. Unfortunately, she's also crippled by loneliness and fear and mourning of the family that she's left behind. Every other chapter, however, in this book, we follow a man named Jondalar. He belongs to the Zelandoni people, who are another tribe of Cro-Magnons like Ayla. As he and his brother go on a journey, they leave their tribe to go westward and see what they can discover, because that's what people do sometimes. Jondalar's main quest, like his driving force, seems to be that he can't love women, but he has sex with a lot of them, but he can't find one that meets all of his standards that he could love. So the things that I like and dislike about this book can basically be chopped down that middle. I liked Ayla's bits, didn't like Jondalar's as much. Ayla's chapters kept with Owl's tradition of sort of this beautiful lush world building and loneliness and self-discovery. Seeing Ayla continually rise to the challenges of being alone was pretty phenomenal. And I guess as far as Jondalar's bits, I really liked human interactions that we got to see, and just seeing the human communities and how they functioned was very interesting. Though I do think that they were a little too idyllic just to like overly contrast them with the people of the clan. I feel like that was a little too simplistic. As far as things I didn't like, between Clan of the Cave Bear and Valley of Horses, The story went from being like a cool historical fiction, almost survivor story, into a caveman romance. And so a lot of the things that I liked from the first one were simplified or written over in favor of sex and sexuality. Additionally, I think that the pacing of this one was much slower than the pacing of the first, and the ending was really anticlimactic. Basically, the book devolved into porn, and then on the last paragraph or so, and that was like really gratifying to read, but the lead up to it kind of cheapened the effect. But I still am addicted to this book series, and I will be continuing it with it. I definitely do need a pause again. I ended up giving The Valley of Horses a 3 out of 5 stars, but like with the first, the addiction factor and the can't stop thinking about it factor is still kicking in, so I might even bump that to a 3.5. I don't know, man. Jean M. Al, something about her writing clicks with me. And the last thing that I got to actually finish in the month of September was The Reader by Bernard Schlink. The Reader follows Michael, a young German boy born basically right after the end of World War II, as he enters into a relatively creepy and abusive relationship with an older woman named Hannah. The relationship essentially spans Michael's 16th year, so he was 15 when it started, and I think he's about 16 when it ends. And Hannah is like 34. So there's that. Michael believes himself to be in love with her, but he doesn't tell his family or friends, and his life just kind of gets a little bit weird because of it, until one day Hannah leaves, and the next time Michael sees her is after he's in law school and he is sitting in on the Nuremberg trials, and Hannah is up there as a defendant. So as far as things I liked about The Reader, from what I've told you, because I don't want to spoil it, because I do think you should all read it. It's relatively short and it packs a big punch. It seems that the reason that Hannah is on trial is not entirely of her doing, but it is, but it's not. It's okay. So as far as things I liked, it's such a complex look into such a complex character and such a complex part of human history and what it means to be human and what it means to love somebody who the world sees as a monster. As far as things I didn't like, and they are big concerns. Pedophilia. Michael was half of Hannah's age when they began their relationship, and the way that their relationship is described, not very good. She's completely in charge of their sexual encounters. She is emotionally withholding and abusive to him. At one point she belts him across the face. It's not good. And there is a thing in Hannah's past that sort of is a reason for her behavior, but you know, cool motive, you're still an abusive pedophile, you know? And the third one, maybe the biggest, Hannah is a former SS officer. She's a Nazi. She was very young. That's not an excuse. When this book first came out, there were a lot of critics who claimed that Schlink was a Nazi sympathizer because of his portrayal of Hannah as maybe a forgivable character. I personally didn't read her that way, but I really do think that maybe his writing of the relationship between Hannah and Michael, the way that that was written, right? Because the Nazism is addressed, right? But the pedophilia and the abuse, never. And I feel like you can't include something like that without addressing it and the scars it leaves behind. And for that reason, I ended up giving The Reader a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And on that happy note, guys, that is it for my September wrap-up. I read a lot of good things in there, and if you've read any of them, I would love to chat about it in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave me a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post more bookish content every single Saturday, and that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you with the next one very, very soon. Goodbye.